Welcome back, folks, to my WrestleRant video series where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch on the WWE Network. Today I'll be talking about the 2009 installment of WWE Bragging Rights, only one of two pay-per-views to be held under that name. So kicking it off was The Miz against John Morrison, a champion versus champion, brand versus brand matchup. So now, for anyone not familiar with this concept of this pay-per-view bragging rights, it was to do just that, earn bragging rights for your respective show. It was Raw versus SmackDown, and I'll get onto later why this whole concept was not a good idea in 2009, why it should have been done earlier. But nevertheless, though, The Miz representing Monday Night Raw, SmackDown being represented by John Morrison, United States Champion, Intercontinental Champion, and what made this matchup so much more better was so much better, actually, not more better. Excuse me, I can't remember there. Was the fact that these two had history dating back to their dirt sheet days. Now, it was only a couple months before this that The Miz had turned on John Morrison when he was drafted to Monday Night Raw in the 2009 WWE Draft. John Morrison went on to become a babyface on Friday Night SmackDown, and it wasn't until this pay-per-view that the two finally crossed paths. So the two had a history together. It wasn't a random brand matchup like we would get with Daniel Bryan and Dolph Ziggler the following year, which was actually a better matchup than this. But that didn't really have much history behind it, except for the fact, like, hey, here's one mid-card champion, here's the other, let's put them in a matchup. At least these two had a legit feud going into this matchup. The Miz and John Morrison had a good matchup. It wasn't anything stellar, but given the fact that it was their first singles matchup since parting ways from the Dirt Sheet duo, it was memorable for that respect. But that being said, though, The Miz had a very good showing here. John Morrison did as well. The Miz would go on to become a WWE champion, of course, only a little over a year later. And John Morrison was opening eyes and turning heads over on the SmackDown brand when he was contending for the World Heavyweight Championship here and there every couple of months against Jeff Hardy and CM Punk and all these other kind of people. But a good matchup to kick off the show with, because it definitely gave The Miz the bragging rights that he could brag about in the next couple of months. Of course, that he can use that as his fodder for all of his promos for the next several months, especially given the fact that The Miz was the only Raw superstar on the show to win a match for his respective brand. So with that in mind, I think that made the win a little bit more special for the Awesome One and the United States Champion. So a good match here to kick off the show. Like I said before, it had the history, it had the in-ring action, it had the brand supremacy kind of thing going for it. So with all that being said, I thought it was a pretty entertaining opener. So up next, we had the Divas in action. We had from SmackDown, Michelle McCool, Beth Phoenix, and Natalya taking on Raw Divas, Melina, Kelly, and Gail Kim. So this was legitimately a matchup that was thrown together at the last minute. They had a Divas trade a couple of weeks before this when Melina went to Raw, and let's see who else moved. Beth Phoenix went to SmackDown. And they said that Mickie James wasn't part of Team SmackDown because Michelle McCool did not want her on that team. So that would kind of plant the seed for that feud that would go on for the next couple of months over on SmackDown. But essentially, this was a heel versus face matchup. No one really cared. No one cared about the brand split or about the brand matches at this point in time, about Raw or SmackDown winning. So like I said, I'll get to that at the end of this video. But no one really cared about this matchup. They didn't have any reason to. It only went about 7 minutes. The wrestling was fine. They had a lot of good workers in this matchup with Melina, Michelle McCool, Beth Phoenix, and Natalya. They all made up for the Kelly involvement in this contest. But like I said before, it really didn't have a story behind it, so people didn't really have any reason to care. So the heel Divas went over, giving SmackDown a win, tying it up 1-1. So that was pretty predictable in order to give the bragging rights 7-on-7 matchup a little bit more meaning and more at stake. Given the fact that someone had to win that matchup and one brand would walk away with those bragging rights. And I'll get to that in a second. But up next, we had the World Heavyweight Championship up for grabs with The Undertaker defending the gold against Batista, CM Punk, and Rey Mysterio. So usually I'm not a fan of fatal four-way triple threat matches or anything like that because multi-man matches can be a major train wreck. And this matchup definitely had its moments of mediocrity. If you go back on YouTube and type in botched spots with Batista and Undertaker or wrestlers talking to one each other during matches, there is a clip from this matchup in that video. Batista, I think, is being chokeslammed by Undertaker or on the receiving end of a last ride. And you can verbally see them, you can visually see them talking it out and saying what's going to happen next. So it is pretty comical, but it was a bad slip on their part. But all in all, though, I thought this was a good matchup. It wasn't a memorable fatal four-way. They just had to get the world champion on the show, so they just come through together at the last minute. The real feud here was between The Undertaker and CM Punk. So the submission matchup they had on SmackDown 2 days before this show probably should have happened at bragging rights. They just needed to get Rey Mysterio and Batista in there somehow so Batista can have could have a reason to turn on Rey Mysterio afterwards. And of course, that was probably the most memorable thing about this entire matchup, probably the show, when he said, "You're supposed to be my friend," and Batista would go on to become a great heel over on SmackDown before moving into a feud with John Cena on Monday Night Raw over the WWE Championship. But that really all happened on this show. I mean, they teased it, of course, several points in this matchup, but it kind of came out of left field because in the weeks going into the show over on SmackDown, they never really teased it at all. Batista came back from injury that fall, and he was feuding with Jericho, and Rey Mysterio came back at that point, but there was never really any dissension in the ranks between Batista and Rey Mysterio. So, although there had been some pre-established relationship between the two, of course, dating back to Eddie's death years ago before this show, people didn't really see Batista's heel turn coming. Maybe that was for the better, because that made it that much more of a surprise and that much better of a moment when he destroyed Rey Mysterio. And if there's anyone you're going to turn heel on, it's Rey Mysterio, because the guy's like a rag doll compared to people like Batista. So he threw him around like crazy at ringside after the matchup. Pretty cool visual. Like I said before, it would kick off the awesome heel run of Batista for the rest of 2009 and going to 2010. So like I said before, a very memorable moment there, but the match itself was pretty forgettable, especially since it only went about 10 minutes when it probably should have gotten more time. I know they were on a time, they had some time constraints with the Iron Man match and all that kind of stuff, but still, though, this matchup probably should have gotten a few more minutes and maybe scratch the Divas match or something. So, of course, up next we had the 7-on-7 Raw versus SmackDown tag team matchup. Not elimination rules like in 2010, but the talent in this contest representing SmackDown was Chris Jericho, who was a team captain. I think Kane was also a co-team captain as well. R-Truth, Matt Hardy, Finlay in the Hart Dynasty, Tyson Kidd and David Hart Smith, against Team Raw, D-Generation X, Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Big Show, Cody Rhodes, Jack Swagger, Kofi Kingston, and Mark Henry. So both teams were really, really random, a mixture of both heels and faces. So for that reason alone, people in attendance really didn't have any reason to care about one team or the other, because some of their favorite wrestlers were on one team, and Raw, some of them had some of their favorite wrestlers as well. And it's not like people in the audience were cheering for Team Raw or Team SmackDown. And of course, they would ask people from the crowd. They would show a video package before this matchup occurred. They would ask people outside before the show, who do you think is going to win? I'm Team Raw, I'm Team SmackDown. But really, I know the brand split died in like 2011, 2012, but by 2009, no one gave a fuck about either Raw or SmackDown. They were already having so many super shows, and people were switching brands without any real notice. So by that point, people did not give two shits about the brand split or Raw and SmackDown or whoever would win. So they were pretty dead for this matchup. And of course, the only shocking moment from this contest was when Big Show turned down his team, and it would later be revealed because he was offered a World Heavyweight Championship match from SmackDown general manager Teddy Long because he helped his team win. So it made sense from a storyline standpoint, of course, to help his buddy Chris Jericho, the other half of the WWE Tag Team Unified Champions. But the match itself, I mean, like I said, it was a cool concept, but no one really gave two shits about this contest. And it didn't really help that Team SmackDown, they had qualified, they had Eric Escobar, Drew McIntyre, I think Crime Time, and a few others, but they scrapped that team at the last minute because they probably knew that they were going to suck and no one cared about anyone in the matchup. So they put these guys in there instead, R-Truth, Matt Hardy, Finlay, and the Hart Dynasty. They put a whole bunch of other people in there instead because no one cared about the other people that were supposed to be competing in that contest. So, like I said with Miz, it gave Chris Jericho some bragging rights, some fodder for his promos over the next couple of weeks, as he would also go on to contend for the World Heavyweight Championship at Survivor Series against The Undertaker. So the match itself was boring, but a memorable moment with Big Show turning heel on his team. And of course, that would lead us to the main event, the Iron Man match between John Cena and Randy Orton for the WWE Championship. Now, I know people hear that and just roll their eyes because we've already seen them by this point, and much less in 2014, wrestle each other a million times over. But of all the matches you two have had at SummerSlam 07, some of their matches in 2008, and their long series of matches in 2009, including at SummerSlam, Breaking Point, Hell in a Cell, which I thought was a good matchup. This was probably their best matchup to date, better than their Hell in a Cell matchup, better than their submission matchup, their I Quit contest, better than their, what else did they face? A TLC matchup in 2013. I thought, in my opinion anyway, this was the best Cena Orton match I've ever seen. One of the best matches these two have ever had together. So, like I said before, I mean, the feud was stale. People just wanted it to end. And they were already playing hot potato with that title. Cena would win it, then Orton would win it, Cena would win it back. Like all this craziness. But the feud itself, I thought, was well constructed and a very, very good matchup here. It was the last Iron Man match, actually, to occur in WWE. We have yet to see another Iron Man matchup in WWE. No, I do not count the one with Triple H and Curtis Axel from an episode of Raw last year. That never really happened, so it doesn't really count. So this was the last Iron Man match, and it's hard to believe it's been 5 years. I know they had one in 05, so 4 years between that one and this one, and it's been over 5 since we last had one in WWE. So they're probably just waiting to find the two right guys to do it. Like, I know Cena and Orton is not a legendary feud in some people's eyes, but it is one of those memorable feuds from the PG era, I guess, as you can call it, because they faced off so many times. Have all of their matches been great? Absolutely not. But for the most part, though, it's a pretty memorable rivalry that people will be talking about for, years on end. Whether it be positive or negative, people will remember this feud. So to have them, faced off one final time in an Iron Man matchup, anything goes, by the way. It was no disqualification. They were all over the arena. A lot of cool spots. 2 trading victories. You hear one here, one there. RKO's out of nowhere using the set up the stage. That was pretty cool. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The anything can happen unpredictable feeling that it had to it. But it was a great way to blow off this feud between Cena and Orton. I mean, in retrospect, it probably would have had more meaning had these two not had another million more matches. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous, because I remember watching this a couple of weeks later, because people have, gone on record and told me, like, why are Cena and Orton facing off again? Shouldn't their last matchup been at Bragging Rights 2009? The stipulation was that these two don't have to face each other for forever. This is the last matchup ever. The stipulation for this contest was that Randy Orton couldn't challenge for the WWE title while John Cena was still champion during that reign. And he would go on to drop that title a month or two later anyway, so that stipulation was null and void. But even still, though, people look back on that matchup and think that the stipulation was that Randy Orton and John Cena could never have another match. And that was never the stipulation at all, hence why we continue to see that stipulation. We continue to see that matchup, even as of 2014, as of last Sunday at Hell in a Cell. But, so like I said, had these two not had other matches on pay-per-view since then in the last 5 years, this matchup, in retrospect, would have meant more. But even still, though, I thought it was a great way to kill off their feud with John Cena, predictably coming out on top, because had John Cena not won, he would have moved over to the SmackDown brand, and of course, we never knew that was going to happen. It did happen once for like an hour in 2011, a part of the WWE draft that year, but does that really count? So, a great matchup here between Cena and Orton, like I said before, probably their best bout to date, and probably the best bout they ever will have, especially with the no disqualification thing, and it didn't feel fresh at the time, but they came up with all the innovative spots in this contest, so I really enjoyed this. It was a great way to go off the show with a new world champion being crowned. So all in all, this was a decent show. Bragging rights, like I said before, and I'll talk about the concept of the show in just a second, but on the whole, though, this show I thought was enjoyable. Was it better than 2010 show? Maybe. I have to go back and read the results for that when I watched the show a couple days ago. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's going to take a few minutes. And you can hear about my thoughts on that and when I review the 2010 installment of that pay-per-view. But on the whole, though, this show I thought it was a good show, not a great show. Miz and Morrison had a good contest. Like I said before, it had the history behind it, so it was an anticipated contest. The Divas matchup was completely forgettable, so throwaway contest there. Fatal 4-way, again, forgettable, but Batista turned heel there, so it was memorable for that reason. Team SmackDown came out on top. The match itself was very boring, but Big Show's heel turn was memorable, and of course, in the main event, John Cena and Randy Orton competing in that 1-hour Iron Man matchup. So if you're sick of John Cena and Randy Orton, and if you're sick of Big Show turning face and heel every 5 minutes, and if you're sick of Batista, then you will hate this show. But if you're a fan of Batista like I am and like seeing him turn heel on Rey Mysterio and say, "You're supposed to be my friend," and if you like John Cena and Randy Orton matches, and even if you don't like me, because I don't think Cena and Orton have that great of chemistry, which is mind-boggling to me considering the fact how many matches they've had over the last 12 years. But that was a very good matchup. The Iron Man matchup I thought was great. Best Iron Man matchup of all time? Probably not. Arguably, no. Of course not. The Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart takes that award easily. But for a PG-era matchup, I thought it was pretty good. So on the whole, though, would I suggest you go out of your way to watch a show? Probably not. But if there's one matchup on the show that you should go back and watch, it is Cena and Orton. I thought it was the peak of their long 12-year feud as it is now. And in my opinion, like I said before, the best bout these two have ever contested against each other. So with that being said, I appreciate you guys watching the video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. In my next video, I'll be talking about Bragging Rights 2010. Oh, and I forgot to talk about this before, but the whole Raw and SmackDown concept was so dumb in 2009. Because like I said before, there's been so many super shows and people switching brands like here and there every few months without any real reason behind it, that no one gave two shits about Raw or SmackDown. Like, I'm not Team Raw, I'm not Team SmackDown, I just watch both shows. So by 2009, the idea behind the pay-per-view was really irrelevant. It would have worked a lot better in like 2005 or 04, even when the brands were actually enemies and the GMs were actually at each other's throats. In 2009 and 2010, it really was not. It didn't pack a punch because no one cared about Raw or SmackDown by that point, and that's why it really came as no surprise when the brand split was eventually done away with a couple of years later. Like, I'm a big fan of the brand split, and I thought it should be brought back, but if it's going to be mishandled like this, like it was in 09, 2010 when the brands didn't mean shit, then there's really no point. But like I said before, though, thanks guys for watching. Always appreciate it. You can find me on Facebook at Graham G.S. Matthews. Follow me on Twitter at WrestleRant. And like I said before, I'll be back in a couple more days with my review of the 2010 installment of Bragging Rights. On that note, I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch you guys then.